some latecomers arrive. But for those of you I haven't had the opportunity to meet, I am Danielle Patterson, the CEO of Family Office List. And I am so excited to be sharing today's guest with you, Ron Diamond. I will read his bio so that those of you who are not familiar with his incredible history in the space can learn. Before I do that, just a few little housekeeping things. Ron will be speaking, 20 minutes or so. We definitely want to make time to engage and answer questions that you have. So I know I've enabled the chat, but please feel free, use the Q&A. Anything that you'd like to ask, learn from Ron, we'll make sure to make time for that at the end. I am going to record this, so I will follow up with a link, and I'll be sure to include all the amazing ways you can follow along with Ron's work. He's done an amazing TED Talk. We'll get to that all in a minute, but we'll include that in the follow-up. I hope you can all stay till the end. We have a fun treat that we've been doing. One of our partners, Gift Suite, which is led by an amazing female CEO, Sangeeta Verma. She's based in LA, and her company is this really incredible gifting agency, and they work with clients to create and send thoughtful, very values-based luxury gifts. So she has generously offered all of our speakers one, so we'll be sending you one, Ron. And then one lucky attendee, so stay till the end, we'll announce that. We are taking a break from our MasterClass series next week. We're going to do a really informative webinar. I don't know if any of you have heard, there's a new technology platform out there called Hatcher Plus, and it really is all-encompassing. It simplifies a lot of the complexity of fund creation, stakeholder reporting, and it has what I'm excited about, this really unique AI-powered deal flow sourcing and analysis tool. And I think all these resources are great, whether you're a family office, a fund manager, or a founder. So we'll be introducing that. I'll follow up with information on that as well. But enough of my information, really excited to move on to the main attraction, Ron. I've been following his work for years. I'll mention in his bio, his podcast. I couldn't recommend it more. I've learned so much, and I'm really honored to share his wisdom with you. So I will share Ron's bio, and then we will pass the mic off to him. So longtime investor and entrepreneur, Ron Diamond is the founder and chairman of Diamond Wealth. He represents over 100 family offices ranging in size from 250 million to 30 billion. Diamond Wealth invests in private markets, including private equity, venture capital, and real estate. In addition, Diamond Wealth has divisions that focus on philanthropy, wealth transfer, investment banking, social impact, and governance. Ronald is helping to launch the Family Office Initiative at the University of Chicago Booth School of Business, which is, groundbreaking. This is exciting news. I just heard it myself this week. Ronald serves on the advisory board of 10 privately held companies and acts as chairman on 4 of them. And I joked, I said, Ron, how do you ever sleep? He said he gets 8 hours of sleep a day. So I don't know how he does it all, but in a podcast I listened to him this morning, it's because he loves what he does. Ronald is also the chair of 2 Tiger 21 chapters in Chicago and chairs a newly created family office group for Tiger 21. And I'm curious, Ron, is that the one that's in Charleston? Or they're just holding a meeting there?
It's just a family office meeting there, yes.
Gotcha. He is the past chairman of the advisory board for the Disruptive Technology and Digital Cities program at Stanford University and taught classes in the entrepreneurial program at Stanford. Ronald recently did a TED Talk on family offices and is a frequent speaker at family office and alternative investment conferences, which get to meet Ronald in person next month at Neil Green's Jobboy event in Savannah. Very excited. Mr. Diamond is also the founder of Family Office World. That's his podcast, familyofficeworldpodcast.com, a podcast whose mission is to educate the market about family offices. Earlier in his career, Ron founded Pinnacle Capital, a $250 million hedge fund that outperformed the S&P index 10 out of 10 years, before ultimately selling his company to an international investment firm. Previously, Ron served as senior managing director at Bear Stearns. He began his career as an analyst at Drexel Burnham Lambert. Deeply committed to giving back, Diamond is an active philanthropist and civic leader. He serves on the leadership circle of the Aspen Institute, a global nonprofit organization committed to realizing a free, just, and equitable society. He also sits on the board of several other charities and nonprofit organizations in his community. Diamond studied at Northwestern University, graduating magna cum laude and earning his degree in economics. And I also know that he is an incredible father and, as you will see, an amazingly humble and incredible speaker. So I couldn't be more honored to feature you today, Ron, and turn the mic over.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. I follow your work, and you do some terrific work for family offices, and I think it's certainly needed. What I wanted, I think, to do today is talk a little bit about kind of the evolution of family offices and kind of where we are today, and then kind of pivot over to where I see this market going. There's so many misconceptions about family offices, and the reality is that the model itself doesn't work. So statistically, only 25% of family offices make it to the second generation. 10 make it to the third, and 5 make it to the fourth. So we're in a period where everyone is starting a family, or a lot of people are starting family offices, but the model's broken. The model's broken for several reasons. So let's do a little history. In the United States, where most of your listeners probably are, family offices really started in the late 1800s with Vanderbilt and Carnegie and Rockefeller. In Europe, obviously, it started hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But when you hear the term family office, the vast majority of family offices started since 2000. So the statistics are 68% of the family offices that exist today started since 2000, and half of them started since the crash. So this is a very, very new industry. And as I said, the statistics, the model doesn't really work. I think we're maybe in the second inning, maybe the third inning in the evolution of family offices. And what's fascinating to me is that I graduated from Northwestern University in 1987, right when private equity was just taking off. And when you think about it, I used to run a hedge fund. So the reason private equity took off was because if you're running a company, and you've got a lot of entrepreneurs on this call, and every 90 days, you've got to report to me, somebody like me or an analyst on Wall Street, it's very, very difficult to run a company that way. It's easy to run it. So private equity took off because the model was better. You didn't have to report every 90 days, and the model was much more aligned. So basically, 2% covers the overhead, 20%, they only make money if you make money. So interests were completely aligned, and I think that was really, really important. What's happened, in my opinion, and I'm correct, many of these private equity firms have, not all, but many of them have bastardized the bit. It's become an AUM game, and it's become, the funds have become too large. And if you do the economics and you think about it, I have a friend who did a roll-up of logistics companies. He needed about $150 million, phenomenal track record. And the placement agent in New York was able to get him $500 million to start this. And my friend said, "That's terrific. I just need 150 and we'll get started." The placement agent, and if I've got any listeners from New York, no, I'm not going to apologize, because could only happen in New York. The placement agent literally came to his apartment and wrote down 2% of 150 million equals X, and 2% of 500 equals Y. What am I missing? And what my friend, who was a bit incredulous, said was, he was scratching his head. He said, "Well, if I do what you want me to do, there won't be a fund two, because I can't deploy the other 350. Now, I'm smart enough to know that I make more personally. 2% of $500 million, I'm smart enough to know, is more money than 2% of 150, but I can't deploy that other 350. To me, that's a microcosm of what's wrong with the industry in general. And I'm making broad strokes. I think that as private equity and venture capital disrupted the public markets in the mid 80s, I believe that family offices will slowly, not They're not there yet, and they'll never replace it. But they're going to slowly disrupt private equity and venture capital. And the reason for that is the biggest advantage that family offices have is they have something called patient capital. And I always go back when I teach my courses at Stanford, I always go back to look at the alignment of interest, follow the money and look at where it goes. So if you look at the way everything's structured in the private equity world, and the private equity model has been extraordinarily fantastic, successful, and these funds have done extremely well, and a lot of people have made a lot of money. So it's been terrific. But if you look at how they're structured, they're compensated to flip companies every 3 to 5 years. That's how the partners at these private equity firms are compensated. And so if you think about it, if you look at a lot of these companies that are purchased, you see a private equity firm purchases a family-owned business from a family. They'll hold it for 3 to 5 years. They'll sell it oftentimes to a second private equity firm. They'll hold it for 3, 4, 5 years, sell it to perhaps a third private equity firm. So over the course of 20 years, you could see that one company, we'll call it a widget company, change hands 4 to 5 times. And if you look at the costs and the taxes and the inefficiencies and the disruption in business versus a family office who is not compensated or paid to flip companies, they just want to compound things. And they could buy a company, hold it for 20 years. So if you compare and contrast those two, it's night and day as far as the results of it. So I think family offices have something called patient capital. People understand it. More and more people will learn about the value of patient capital. It is a superior model. The problem right now, though, is that there are very few family offices that are efficient enough to compete directly with the Carlyles and the Blackstones. So while I am saying it is a superior model, and it is, we're
Right.
not there yet. We're still very, very early. So you look at, I'm good friends with Paul Carbone, who runs the Pritzker family office for JB and Tony Pritzker. They've institutionalized this business. They've got a team of 65 people
Wow.
that analyzes deals, right? And they can compete directly with Carlyle and Blackstone and KKR, and oftentimes beat them because their model is better. If they're looking for long term.
Right.
You look at all of the money that's out there that's sitting in dry powder in the private equity. At some point, they have two options. They either deploy it, which 100% they will, or their other option is they can give it back, and they never will. So what happens is when the markets get frothy, and we saw this happen in 2020 and 19, we would look at deals and we loved companies that we were going to buy, but a private equity firm would come and pay 2, 3 times what we thought it was worth. So we would never outbid. So what's happened is if you're a family-owned business and you're looking for the highest bidder, 99, maybe even 100 out of 100 times, that's going to be a private equity firm. They have to deploy the capital. Family office will not. The advantage of working with a family office for these family-owned businesses is that they're partners and they're strategic partners, and they look at things through the same lens.
Yes.
So they want to do it more and more. Now, I speak a lot about this, and I just did a TED Talk on this. Family offices are very inefficient. They're very siloed and they're very fragmented. That's starting to change. So really what I'm talking about is it can't not happen. It could change. It could take more time than I think it will. But in the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see a huge shift in more and more companies going to family offices. They're going to become more professional. They're going to become more institutional, and they're going to become less siloed. So one of the things that you look at is compensation. So how do these family offices compete? Because if the model's better, but they don't have the infrastructure yet to compete with the private equity firms, how does like Paul Carbone of the Pritzkers or Sergey Brin's or Michael Dell, how do they do it? And one of the things they do has to do with compensation. In order to attract talent, you have to compensate these people. And again, I'm generalizing, but most family offices, if they pay somebody out of Stanford $250,000, many of them, not all, but many of them look at that as a cost. In other words, it cost me $250,000. If Blackstone or KKR or Carlyle pays a kid out of Stanford $250,000, they look at them as a potential $10-20 million profit center. So it's
Right.
nuanced,
Yeah.
but it's not a cost. And
Okay.
until families start understanding that. So what
Okay.
Tony Pritzker has been able to do more successfully than almost any family office that I've worked with is he's able to incent the people who work there, giving them part of the carry, giving them some kind of
Really?
loans or forgivable loans or letters of credit. This is really key in order for the family offices to compete for the talent. Now, when you look at the industry from a macro standpoint, you look at these kids who, I've got two beautiful daughters, one just graduated college and one is a sophomore. But if they're going to get into finance, they're going to go into private equity, venture capital, real estate, hedge funds. They're going to get into one of those areas. Nobody goes to get into the family office space because they don't really know what family offices are. So the problem with me today with the industry in general that I see is that you've got huge amounts of money in very inefficient hands. So I don't like to pick on anybody, but let's say you create a company, we'll call it Beanie Babies, right? And it was a brilliant company. Ty Warner created that, and very few people could have done. He was brilliant in how he created it. Sold the company for billions of dollars. Well, just because you can create Beanie Babies doesn't mean you could buy hotels. And
Love
what
that.
we saw happening is a huge amount of money in inefficient hands. So what I see right now is the biggest obstacle that many, not all, but many of the family offices have is the ego of the matriarch or patriarch. I make no value judgment. If people made their money, they could do whatever they want, and I don't judge anybody. I'm just telling you objectively the way that it could be most effective. Um, what I see happening, and I see the trend that's going to happen, is post crash, pre COVID, no matter what you invested in, it went up. Private equity, venture capital, real estate, credit, Bitcoin, which I still don't understand, um, and everything went up. Stock market. So what family offices did is they basically said, well, why should I pay these experts 2 and 20 if I could make money myself? And they were right until they weren't. And what we saw happening about 18 months ago when the Fed started raising interest rates is now all of a sudden family offices are not just making money in everything they do. Some of them are actually losing money. Carta did a study where the average Series B investment was down 50%. The average Series C investment was down 75%. So in the last year and a half, I think you've seen a change. And I think we're at an inflection point where family offices are starting to realize they need to stay in their lane. So if they made their money in real estate, they should do real estate, but they shouldn't do technology. They shouldn't do private credit. They shouldn't
Right.
get in the other areas. And I think what's going to happen is a lot of the family offices that did direct investments because they wanted to avoid the fees are now getting smarter, and they're going to pivot and they're going to start going back. So if you're a sponsor and you're looking to raise money from family offices, I think it's a tremendous time, because if you're an expert in real estate or credit or private equity or venture capital, a lot of these family offices are going to come back and say, I don't know that space, and they're going to realize it. It wouldn't happen if they weren't losing money in the past 18 months. But because this is happening, you're going to see a change. So I look at this is, to me, intellectually, it's a fascinating market because this is changing in real time.
Oh, yeah.
And you hear the word family office. um, I've got friends who, they sell their company for $50 million and they set up a family office. Now, again, I don't judge, but objectively, and I could do the math with people, you need a minimum of $250 million in order for it to make economic sense to have a family office. Otherwise, you're better off going to a multifamily office. So families typically between 10 million to 200 million. That's kind of the sweet spot of the multifamily office. Once you have 250 or more, then you have the economics where you could do it. But there are thousands of family offices or people who say they're family offices
Right.
who have less than 250 million. They're better off, in my opinion, focusing on what they do and then outsourcing the rest either to a multifamily office or to other people who are best in class in what they do. I think this is changing in real time, and I want to leave a lot of time for questions for this. But just in conclusion, just from a macro standpoint, we are at a period right now, we're at an inflection point. We're at a period where family offices are starting to disrupt private equity, venture capital, and real estate. There's $10 trillion in capital. There's $84.4 trillion that's coming downstream from the baby boomers to the next gen in the next 20 years. So what we're about to experience is the largest transfer of wealth in history. And the wealth is being transferred. And what's happening is these people who are inheriting the money, they look at things through a little bit of a different lens than people from older generations. Things like impact investing are not as relevant for the older generations as they are for the younger generations. So I have I have two daughters, they buy a pair of jeans. When I bought a pair of jeans when I was in college, I never looked at the back to see who made it, how much it cost, how they treated their employees. It wasn't that I was a bad person. I just didn't have the internet. We had the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now my daughters want to know when they buy something, who makes it, how do they treat their employees, their whole culture, and they could research that. So I think things have changed. And the last point I want to touch on, and this is kind of my North Star, I don't think family offices are a panacea to solve all the world's problems, because they're not. But I do think that family offices can solve many of these issues. I'll give you a couple specific examples. My father passed from prostate cancer at 57. At the same time, I was working at Drexel Burnham, and Michael Milken was my first boss, who also developed prostate cancer. What my dad did is what I would have done, or what most people did, is you go to the 2, 3, 4, 5 best people, get the second, third, fourth opinions, and do everything you can. And he lived 3 years, and then he passed away.
Right.
What Michael Milken did through his family office, and this was 20 some odd years ago, and this is the first time I'd heard the term family office, he wanted to solve it. He wanted to figure this out. So rather than doing what my dad did or what most people would have done, he basically built it like a venture capital fund. So basically he put 2 million here, 3 million here, 250,000 here, 500,000 here. And he spent close to $100 million. And because of Michael Milken, most men, if we live long enough, will die with, but not of, prostate cancer, because that was his cause. And then you fast forward, you look, we had COVID, we had a once in a century pandemic happened a couple of years ago. I would argue that Bill Gates, through his family office, did more for the cure of COVID than the US government. So my North Star is, again, you can't run a philanthropy exactly like a business. But I do believe that over the next 20 years, you're going to see a lot of these, and Sergey Brin's doing this with pancreatic cancer. You're going to see more and more of these family offices run more like a business and help to solve some of these real world problems. So to me, this is like, I'm like a kid in a candy store, because this is changing in real time. It's going to have huge impact on the way companies are financed going forward. It's going to have massive impact on the global economy, and it's going to have a huge impact on how we solve these real world problems. So with that, I will stop and pause, and I'm happy to answer any questions that anybody has, and give you my 2 cents.
Well, that was just amazing, Ron. And I have to say, you're so well positioned to offer value and help guide and address many of these problems, because it is. I mean, you think of all of our own families, how difficult and dysfunctional, and then you add money and business, and it's very complex. So I'm excited, historically, even looking at my 8 years within Family Office List and seeing these trends as well. All of a sudden, families are coming to us with missions and values that they want others to know about. And we see people subscribing because they want to align and co-invest. And I think that is one way as well that you can help when maybe the immediate investment isn't your expertise. But I do think, formalizing and having resources and more education, which, before I open up to everyone else, I don't want to be selfish here, but are you able to speak more about the Family Office Initiative at the University of Chicago and kind of what the goals there will be and what that program will look like?
Yeah, well, so we're going to announce it publicly in the next 60 days. So I don't want to go
Okay.
into too many details, but basically, I created a family office initiative at Stanford University. The thought process was basically, I keynote a lot of these family office conferences, and there's some conferences that are terrific. But some of them are more of a pay to play, and they're not necessarily worth going to. Some of them are great and definitely worth going to, but some aren't. So at Stanford, what I said is, when I chaired the Disruptive Technology Center, let's put together a family office conference that I would tell the families that we invest alongside that they would go to. So what we did, we had Paul Carbone spoke from the Pritzker family office. He wasn't pitching a fund. He was
I
just
love it.
about how he does due diligence. We had Tim Callahan, who was Sam Zell's partner, wasn't raising money for a real estate deal. He was just talking about, after COVID, because this happened during COVID, how he thought the office market. And then Denise Illich, who helped to rebuild Detroit from the Little Caesars family, wasn't saying donate money to my philanthropy. She's just saying, if you're going to be philanthropic, here's how you might want to think of scaling it. So everything we did, we had Kirkland & Ellis and EY sponsor it, but everything we did was purely educational. We had 880 families from 6 continents on the call, 400 over $1 billion on a Zoom call during COVID. And that had nothing to do with me. It had to do with the fact that the content and the speakers were educational. So I think there's a huge demand for that. And what we're going to be doing, without going into too much detail, is we're bringing that over to the University of Chicago. And again, it'll be announced publicly in the next 60 days. But we've got some of the largest family offices in the world that are on the advisory board with me.
Just how exciting. I mean, what a needed opportunity. And I think we all learn so much better from each other. Why make these mistakes? Why go alone when we're such willing participants to share their knowledge and their experience in such a wonderful collaborative experience? So I'm excited. We'll be staying tuned for those announcements in 60 days. Let's go to our questions. All right, so you addressed a little bit about the differences of multi-family offices versus single family in terms of the assets under management. Are there any additional pros and cons of one over the other?
Yeah, well, I would argue that 75 or 80% of the family offices that exist today shouldn't exist as they exist currently. And again, I'm making no judgment. I'm just saying that you can't sell a company for $500 million and then have your son-in-law, who has straight A's from University of Indiana, is your CIO. It just doesn't make sense. You've got too much money in inefficient hands. So I think the real growth is going to be in the multifamily offices, not necessarily in the single family offices. People are, now that they're losing money, they're going to segue out of the single family office model, and many of them will do what they do best, but then kind of pivot. So I think the growth is going to go into the multifamily office model. The different, rather than spending money for your own accountant, your own lawyer, your own admin, your own people, you're sharing the cost with 20, 30 people. That's why multifamily offices were created. So that's really where the growth is going to be. Having said that, I do think you're going to see names in the next 5 to 10 years in the single family offices, like what Michael Dell's family office is doing, what the Pritzkers have done, where they will basically band together. I mean, Michael Dell's family office merged with Byron Trott's, firm, and they'll be household names. So right now, family offices aren't, but I do believe that they will be. But the multifamily office is where the real growth is going to be. You're on mute.
Forgot about all the noise I'm trying to drown out. But interestingly, there are a lot of questions all relating to this single, multifamily, several of them. So I'm kind of consolidating. But someone said, you mentioned families with 250 million net worth might be the minimum threshold for forming a single family office. Is there an upper threshold where families' wealth is so great that using a single family office is absolutely necessary? Where maybe a multifamily office no longer makes sense? That's actually a great question. I'm always curious, is is there a downfall if you're very, very wealthy and you can have your own, but you like a collaborative approach? And then just to add to that, can you share your views on other considerations besides net worth, which you pretty much touched on, that families should be considering as they choose one versus the other?
The shorter answer is no. There's no maximum to have a single family office. What I do think is going to happen though is I do think that, and you're starting to see it. I mean, even Michael Dell and the Pritzkers, they're still raising money from outside with other family offices. So they will do that, and there will be synergy there. But look, family offices weren't great. If you look at the statistics, with 68% started since 2000 and half since the crash, it's not that all of a sudden people wanted to start raising money and managing money because they had a passion for that. They stopped trusting Wall Street. I had a hedge fund. I had the ability to put up gates. Gates basically are, I could say you can't sell, and there's reasons for that. But a widget manufacturer in Wichita doesn't understand that. So I think that the reason that many of these family offices started wasn't so much that they wanted to start a family office because they love to manage money. They stopped trusting Wall Street. And the interesting thing I will say is, for the sponsors out there, and I know there's a lot of people who raise money or trying to raise money, the first, second, third thing a family office wants to know when they work with somebody is, can I trust you? And then the fourth thing is, what's your track record? And that's flipped from an institutional standpoint. They're going to want to know your 1, 3, 5-year track record, your biggest drawdown. So this is a business built completely on relationship and completely on trust. And it was born because of a lack of trust for Wall Street.
So important. So important. What advice do you have for young inheritors who may feel overwhelmed or uncertain about their financial future and the responsibilities that come with it? I see a lot of that next gen.
Well, that's a great question. And remember, there's $84.4 trillion moving downstream in the next 20 years. And, a 20 or 25 or 30 year, it's hard to comprehend that, right? So I think what's happening is there's some programs for next gens where they get together, and I think that's going to be a really, really important thing, to be involved with groups. I've got 2 beautiful daughters. The last thing you want to do is raise entitled kids. You want to raise kids that have gratitude. And I see, I see it happening. I could see these kids, they don't have to work. And they get it. They don't live the life that they could or probably should live. So there are problems with it. But I think the answer is, there's organizations, we're putting together something at University of Chicago also, where next gens can collaborate and work together and share best practices. And I think that's really the best thing to do, because you can't, if you inherit $1 million and you're 14 years old, you can't comprehend that.
No, it's like you
And then
almost have
multiply
to
that by
protect
10 or
them
20.
from their wealth. Well, and I do get excited when you see maybe some of these next gen who are passionate about certain projects, and it's a way to kind of bring the family together. Some of these impact initiatives where now all of a sudden, there's some underlying family value that all the generations can kind of come together and get behind. But yeah, it's that meaning, that purpose that, if someone lost who doesn't need to work may not have. So let's see, we've got more. Are family offices paying enough attention to the attributes of family members as it relates to the jobs they are asked to do? Are the soft skills appreciated, and vis-a-vis the effects that they have on a family office dynamics and productivity?
No. So I'll answer the second question first. Part of the reason that only 25% of families make it to the second gen and 10 to the third and 5 to the fourth is, let's look at what happens. An entrepreneur builds a company and he sells a company, let's call it a technology company, for $500 million or $1 billion. What's the first thing they typically do? They want to invest. And then all of a sudden now they're like a magnet, and all of their friends and people who know them want them to invest in their companies. And they do. They invest in different private equity and venture capital and real estate and credit deals and all sorts of different deals. What's the first thing they should do is they should talk to an estate planning attorney, because without the proper structure, it's like the foundation of a house. Without the proper structure, it falls apart. And I think that when you have this kind of money this suddenly, and all of a sudden everyone's coming after you to invest in it, um, there's a natural inclination to want to invest in with your friends and people who you think are smart, et cetera. But I tell people, we work with about 100 family offices. I invest alongside them, and I tell everybody that I work with, and in families that are coming to me just for thought or advice, that you should, in an ideal world, once you have a liquidity event, don't, if you can, it's not easy, but try not to do anything for 6 to 12 months. Try not to make any, and you're gonna miss out on the best opportunity in the world, and you're gonna miss out on opportunities. But truthfully, I run a hedge fund. I've never bought a stock at the bottom. I've never sold a stock at the top. You just try to get in between the 20-yard lines. So the first thing they should do is talk to an estate planning attorney. So these soft skills, which are governance, next gen, succession, wealth transfer, these are very, very relevant. And without the proper governance, I don't care how good of an investor you are, your family office is going to fall apart. And without if you haven't laid down the mission statement or the values for the family office, it's going to also fall apart. So if the goal is to have this last multi-generations, then you have to create value to do it. And the first thing you have to do is talk to an estate planning attorney. And these governance, these soft skills, I would argue, are more important than the actual investing skills.
I love that. Our neighbors were very fortunate. They're very open and they share kind of how they run their family office. And they actually shared their family's mission statement. And it's really like taking the time and those communication skills and being able to know what you stand for. And then yes, exactly. Think about the future. At the end of the day, what's all that wealth if you can't, make it last? So you've given me good ideas too, because it is about trust, and there are all these very key essential providers, and knowing, who can fulfill those roles and help you, because there's so much, like you said, it's like a building the foundation for a successful future. Let's see, what do you believe are the best ways to get aligned with family offices who should be institutionalized, well capitalized, but are behind the trends? There are major shifts in fund investors being able to join family office, multifamily offices, but there's a connectivity gap. Absolutely.
I don't fully understand the question.
So what are the best ways to get aligned with these family offices who
Okay.
should be institutionalized? Like, how do we help close that connectivity gap?
I think it's through education. I mean, that's one of the things we're trying to do through University of Chicago, and I think it's through education. You've got the reason I tied it to a university and not to a corporation, because if we did it with Northern Trust, which is a wonderful company, at the end of the day, Northern Trust still wants to have people deposit money in their account, right? So there is an agenda. If you
Yeah.
deal with an academic institution, there is no agenda. The agenda is just to educate. So that's why I'm doing it with an academic institution. I think it's pure. I think that interests are completely aligned, and nobody has an agenda. I mean, the agenda is to educate. These kids don't know what family office. We're gonna have courses for undergraduates and graduates, and then also CIOs and different family offices, and the members, matriarchs and patriarchs of the families. But you know, people are very siloed. You built a company selling widgets, um, and you sold it for $1 billion. Um, it's not like I could go to a list and all of a sudden say, all right, give me, the 500 families who invest just in real estate and things specifically like that, and want to invest in multifamily real estate. So I think that if by doing it through an academic institution, it's pure, it's authentic. And again, the main thing you have to look at is, I always look at like alignment of interest in the agenda.
Yeah.
Everybody has an agenda, and
Yeah.
that's fine. You're a service provider, your agenda is to raise money, and
Right.
there's nothing wrong with that. But it has to be transparent what the agenda is. And I think it's a very opaque market in family offices. And I think a lot of the family offices, um, I think, are going to reevaluate how they do things. And it was only a function of actually losing money in the last 2 to 3 years that's forcing them to do that.
Yes. And I agree. I think that the approach you were taking is so smart because at the end of the day, you question, you feel a bit defensive when there are these hidden motivations. And at the end of the day, yes, many of us here probably on the call are looking to connect and raise capital, but it starts with that values alignment. How do you show that in working together, it's a true partnership? Because you can get capital from other places. The reason a family office is the patient capital. They're great strategic partners, but you need to show your value too without just coming and asking for something. You have to build that trust. You have to show where you offer them the value in exchange. And I think, yeah, it's a true partnership. So there were two questions along these lines, what is the recommended approach to show them an investment? Or, if they're not within your immediate network, how do you get in front of them?
Add value. We live in a society where you want to, there's a book called The Go-Giver, which I really recommend to everybody. And, we live in a society where we want to get. And what happened is a lot of people look at the world as a zero-sum game, as quid pro quo. I'll give this to you if you give that to me. I probably looked at that more when I was younger, but as I got a little bit older, I looked at the world through a little bit different lens. And what happens is if you give, it comes back to you in spades. I can't tell you how or why, but it just does.
Wow.
And so for family offices, a lot of people are trying to get in the door of family offices. And the first thing they try to do is they'll talk about, we've got a great track record. I've got this real estate fund. It's outperformed these funds and it's done 30% IRR in the last 30 years. And they talk about how great their performance is. And obviously that's important. Before you do that for a family office, figure out a way to add value. So if the family office made money in real estate, and there's an interesting article, forward that article to them. If there's some other family, the first thing that I do, I might have what I consider a very attractive deal that I'm investing in personally. But if I'm just meeting a family for the first time, I will never show them a deal under any circumstances. Basically, the biggest value add that I can do and anybody could do is to introduce them to other family offices, not show them this. Now, the deal that I have might be a terrific deal and maybe they miss out on it, but that's fine. By family offices networking with other family offices, that's really what they want to do. And what I've seen is a trend, and we saw it happen at the Stanford conference, and I think it's going to happen at University of Chicago, where families just want to be together. There is a conference that's run with the largest Kirkland Ellis puts it together, but it's the largest family office in the country. They put 50 of them together at the Little Nell for a weekend, and they leave. And it's a phenomenal conference because nobody has an agenda. Nobody's trying to sell anything, and they're just trying to share best practices. So you need to get in a very safe environment, and it's very hard to do that because there is so much money. And once you could do that and create an environment that's safe and people feel comfortable and share, then you solve 90% of the problem.
Wow. I think that's amazing. And just to talk about, I'm excited to read The Go-Giver. I have not read that, but it really resonates a lot if any of the attendees also watched David Holman's. And what I do try to stress is, we've moved family office lists from this list, encouraging spray and pray. That is not the way to build a relationship. And it's so relational working with these family offices. And it takes time. You can't just expect to send an email and all of a sudden have a deal. It's about adding value and, where can you help? Because in the long-term game, this long horizon, the introductions, the world of family offices is much smaller. Just like, Ron was saying, they attend conferences, they talk. So if you make a good impression and you build that trust, years down the road, it will really pay its dividends. So look for those ways you can add value. I like the idea of the introductions too, because that's, sometimes your network is your biggest net worth. Yes, let's see. Do you have, Ron, how are you on time? It's 11:45. Are you okay? We've got a few more.
I'm good. This is
Thank you.
This is actually fun for me.
Good. Well, I know you're not able to say too much about the University of Chicago, so if this is going too far, we can go to the next question. But is the University of Chicago program open to professionals in the family office world, or only open to people who have family offices? I've seen marketing literature for the program that implies it is only open to people with family offices. And as a private equity professional, I was hoping I could join and participate to move into the family office space.
Yeah, we're going to make an announcement in the next
Okay.
60 days. I can't really talk
Yes. All
in
right.
too much detail about
How
that.
do
So.
you, Diamond Wealth, change the underwriting approach when looking at deals as compared to what an institution or a fund might do? Since you are looking at such long time horizons, are you less concerned with IRR? Do you do more underwriting on the operators, like background checks, etc.? Any comments on how family offices can get away from the bad deals that might seem good on the surface? That was several questions.
Sure. Well, first, let's talk about IRR. For a family office, IRR is a moot point. It doesn't matter because they're looking for things to compound. And that's part of the reason that the patient capital is so important, because the IRR is important for the private equity and venture capital guys because they want to flip money every 3 to 5 years and say, okay, you were able to make 20, 30%. A family office is just, in an ideal world, they'd own a company for 50 years or 100 years and just let it compound. I think Warren Buffett said that it was like the seventh, or Einstein actually said it was one of the wonders of the world is just compound interest. So by letting things compound, which is what family offices want to do, IRR is a moot point. And if you're looking at it from a long-term perspective, if you're if you have a business and you're looking to sell to, you're looking to sell the business, there are private equity firms that are really good and there are operators. But if you look at most of the private equity firms and most of the venture capital firms, most of these people are finance guys and they're not operators. In order to create true alpha, in my opinion, you need to operate. I can create alpha and strip a company and financially engineer it very easily. And that's going to help me short term. But if you're going to grow a company for the next 10, 20, 30 years, you have to operate it. You can't financially engineer it. And that's the difference of family office. And again, I'm not saying that there aren't private equity firms and venture capital firms that operate, because there are wonderful ones that do.
Right.
But in general, these are finance guys. And
Yes.
you can create alpha through finance, through financial engineering. You can only create it through operations. And the family offices, at some point, they operated a company. And they look at things much longer term. So, and they're also strategic partners, right? They're if something bad happens, they're not going to all of a sudden just leave. That's why, trust transcend is more important than performance. Like I've done deals where I'll give you a perfect example. My accountant is a guy named Saul. I'm not going to give his last name, but his name is Saul. And he's a wonderful person. And he's a great accountant. Are there accountants that might be better? Probably. I mean, he's really good. He's in Chicago. He's at a great firm. The reason I use him is when I'm close to the deadline for taxes, he gets more stressed out than me.
Oh.
I've got to calm him down. I'm like, Saul, I'll get it done. I'll get it done. So think about that. He cares so much about me that he's stressed out that I'm going to have to pay a fee, and I don't, but that I'm going to have to pay, that I have to literally calm him down. That's the type of person that I want to work with.
Yes.
So it's not, I used to think intelligence, look, intelligence is a commodity. It is. Right. Integrity is not. And that's really what you have to look for. And that's what the family offices are looking for.
I love that. I really do. I mean, at the end of the day, I love that so many of them have run their own businesses. So it's about efficiency in the operations and not just some of these formalities that are there for, different institutional purposes. Yeah. All right, let's see. That was the end. Let me check the chat. I know some people have been chatting. Looks like lots of just gratitude overflowing, lots of really wonderful remarks and excitement in the chat. I will make a last call. Does anyone else have any questions, any burning questions for Ron? Oh, one in the chat. Let's pull that over.
Well, before I answer that, I will talk a little bit about gratitude because it's a big part of my life. Yeah. I used to think that happy people were grateful, but it's actually the other way around.
Oh,
And I think gratitude is just something that it's an important component of my life.
mm-hmm.
And I just think that, look, at the end of the day, everybody on this call, we're trying to make money, we're trying to get wealthier, we're trying to add value and do well, but keep things in perspective. And, I just try to focus every day on how much I have just a tremendous amount of gratitude for everything, because I know that I'm very fortunate, but I think a lot of us do. So I heard the word gratitude. That's why my ears.
Well, we share the same outlook, and I think it's a mindset, and we can all choose to have that mindset. And one of my favorite quotes that I have framed is, gratitude turns what we have into enough. And we just have to see the world through that lens. And it does, it becomes, you see things through a lens of abundance, and people become partners and not competitors. And I think when we work collaboratively like this, we just have so much more to give. So yes, thank you for tuning into that word. Where did that question go? There's now there's like all this more gratitude. It's buried the question. What does the family office climate look like for investors in the US defense and national security space, where the emphasis is on scalability?
I'm not an expert in that specific area, so I try not to answer questions that I don't. So
Going outside your lane. Yeah.
I don't have a great answer for that.
No worries. No worries. All right. Anyone else? Anyone have anything? I'll see if I can download the chat. Oh, one more. Nope, just lots of gratitude and thankfulness. Well, I'll be sure to, in the follow-up with the recording, share Ron's TED Talk, share the Family Office World podcast. These are all amazing resources where you can just continuously learn. Are you still doing interviews, Ron, on the podcast? Is that still going, or?
Yeah, I did one with David Rubenstein and Tony Pritzker fairly recently, and I did one with Randy Quarles from Eccles. And for me, that's fun. Like, David Rubenstein has his own podcast, and he just does it for fun. For me, it's just anybody that I want to talk that I'm just interested in learning about. I do it. Was interesting on the last podcast, and just in closing up, they turned the question to me, and one of the things that we have in our family is, if you call, you've got younger kids than me, but we have it. If you call 3 times, it's an emergency. So
Okay.
my kid was 7 years old, and they called 3 times. I was meeting with one of the largest family offices in the world in overseas. So I took the call, and I just thought it was an emergency. I said, "What's wrong?" And it was my baby, who was 7, just said, "Daddy, what are the 5 most important things in life?" And I'm just like, "Hold on, that's not an emergency." It turned out to be a school project. So I came home to her, and I said, "Look, A, that's not an emergency,
Right.
but B, I'll help you." So she was working on a class project. So for her, because she sees what I do, and
Yeah.
what's important to me, and so she had to do this. What's the most important thing for her? So I went over it with her. It had to do with being a good listener,
Yeah.
making friends, being nice to mommy and daddy, and there were 2 other things. And then, as only a kid could do, she turned to me, she goes, "What are your 5 most?" And I'm like, "Whatever, don't worry about it." But I did think about it, and then over the last couple months, and this is part of my TED Talk, I for me, it was love, gratitude, attitude, balance, and laughter. So those were, at least to me, the 5 most important things.
Yeah.
So while we're all trying to create alpha, make money, get wealthier, et cetera, um, I try to, as best I can, keep things in perspective. And
Yes.
I think that's because, I know a lot of really miserable billionaires. That's not a good goal.
It's so humbling, because at the end of life, you can't take that money with you, but you can leave a legacy of, amazing things that you did and ways you gave. And I
Well,
think,
the Pharaohs tried it, and it really
yes,
worked. It didn't work out so
exactly.
well.
Exactly. I think, like you too, Ron, I lost my mom to cancer last year, and it really did. It changed the way I see the world. It is short, and we have unique gifts to give. So whatever way that we can give, and I think it's just a great lens to see the world. There is one question that popped up, and it's something I'm really passionate about as well, and I know you are, so I'm going to read it. Do you think family offices can have a key role in impact sustainability investing?
Yes. I think the reason is because it has to do, again, what I talked about with philanthropy. If Michael Milken develops prostate cancer for selfish reasons, but he could solve the problem. I think that, right now, roughly a third of the family offices invest in what I'll call impact investing. it'll probably be 50% in the next 3 to 5 years. That's driven from the younger generation up, not the older generation down. So I think that that's going to be more and more important. And things like climate change, these are things that we didn't think about so much when we were kids. It wasn't as time sensitive. I think these kids do now. So I think the answer to the question is absolutely. Impact investing is a trend that will continue to grow, I think, exponentially.
I love at some of, like at the DC Finance Conference and a few of these where they have the next gen panels, it does seem to be a very common trend. And I just get so excited for these young leaders who are basically convincing, these parents who have maybe had different outlooks on and ways of investing. And they're really, spearheading these new initiatives and convincing as true leaders, why their families should back this. And I think it's a great way to bring the family together and to get them excited and on the same page. So I'm excited by that trend as well.
Well, let me also just add, I think you do terrific work. I think Family Office List, you've done a tremendous service for the community, and you add a lot of value. So I really appreciate what you do, and it's clear that you're passionate about it, and it is a huge value add.
Oh, well, you have added tremendous value, just sharing your wealth. You're so generous with your time today. This has really been a true treat for us. So thank you for all you're doing and for sharing, your thought leadership with us today.
My pleasure.
All right. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Look out for my email probably tomorrow. I'll get that out. And I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.
Thank you.
Thank you.